perspective, what I'd like to do is begin by focusing on nonprofit boards. And I'm going to ask the question, which is, let's have an overview. How are they structured in terms of size and terms and anything else, how they use executive search consultants, whatever you might want to say as sort of an opening. So Suzanne, let's start with you.
Sure. So the nonprofit boards, they vary a lot depending on the type of the organization. So on one end, they can be representative boards. This is typically for the UN organizations and development banks. They can be multi-stakeholder boards with representatives from constituencies, funding partners, hybrid boards where they have also some independent board members, and then of course boards where they have only independent members. And the largest boards are typically the representative boards and the smallest the independent boards. On average, about 10 directors for the independent ones. The terms, the board terms for directors tend to be quite often fixed. So for example, 3 + 3 years, but there are also other models. There may be a fewer board meetings than in the corporate boards, not always, but sometimes the time commitment can be a little bit less. And also importantly, it tends to be unpaid work. And being an ambassador for the organization and the mission is very important for the board directors. In the US, sometimes they also are required to do help with the fundraising as a member of a nonprofit organization.
Okay, and Suzanne, let me ask you a second question, and then we'll switch to Jan. And that is, how open are nonprofit boards to first-time board members?
I think they are open to first-time board members. Quite often, to be honest, when they do approach us, executive search companies, they will have some very specific criteria in mind, and that does also include previous board experience. But yes, we do have examples where we have placed first-time board members.
Terrific. And Jan, if you could give us a little bit of a perspective from what you've seen in the U.S.
I think that as we look at boards, the locals, nationals, and internationals vary on expectations about candidates for board membership, as well as to a certain degree about responsibilities. So as you begin to look at boards, begin to think of it in terms of what level board you're looking at. Size is all over the map. The largest that I've been involved with is 48 members of the board. There are larger ones. The ideal size, if you stick with small group theory, would be an odd number of people, maybe 13, maybe 11, maybe 9, and it would be just representative in order to do the business of the board. In terms of terms, it's again all over the map. Some are specified, and some are until you decide you want to get off the board. So that's part of that process. In the universities, to switch to universities that are nonprofit, many of the public university boards are appointed, and a few are elected, but not many. In the private universities, usually that's a nomination from the trustee search committee. And in terms of known responsibilities, of course, you need to dig deep with legal issues and legal responsibilities that you would have. Obviously, you have to attend meetings, be a committee member, and support the organization. And in terms of giving money, there's a saying in the business, give, get, or get off. So that may influence whether or not you would accept a board membership. In terms of first-time board members, the experience of being a local board member and getting to know the ropes in that from that perspective can then be a door opening to national and international boards.
Okay, and Suzanne mentioned the importance of alignment with the mission. Anything you want to say about that?
I think that's critically important. If it's and part of that is in relationship to another question you're asking about diversity. But alignment with the mission is something that is the umbrella to looking at the board. There are many spokes under the umbrella, so to say, and it just depends on what their current emphasis is. Is it influencing national policy? Is it building international trade? What is the focus? So be sure to be aware of that.
Okay, great. What I'd like to do is pivot a little bit to contrasting not-for-profit boards with for-profit boards. And Shanna, let's begin with you. What are the differences that you could highlight?
Yeah, so when I think about corporate boards, they're really, I would categorize those in really three big buckets. You've got private companies that are either founder-owned or family-owned. You've got private equity-owned companies or companies that are owned by outside investment groups. And then you also have public company boards as well. Sometimes you also have pre-IPO, but knowing that an impending event is taking place. So as I look at those, I would tell you private company boards, private equity owned company boards, there's definitely a trend such that they are inviting outside directors more frequently today than in past years. There is still some of that, who do we know? Let's invite our friends, our colleagues, people in our network to join our board. Although we are seeing a trend such that we are being asked to partner with them and conduct full searches for those individuals. With public companies, they are almost always engaging an executive search firm in that endeavor. Obviously, they are required to adhere to far more stringent reporting and transparency regarding the work, heavy regulatory compliance and fiduciary responsibility. So those entities, public companies, are almost always using search firms to help with that effort.
Okay, great, Shanna. And Umberto, what are you seeing on the corporate or private boards contrasting to not-for-profits?
Absolutely, Shanna. I totally agree with Shanna. I mean, she presented a very, very good, presentation. What I see is that the composition is very much depending on the bylaws and regulations sometimes. More and more diversity is the key word. Diversity means not only gender, but skills, competences, and age now more and more. There is a trend towards having executive, people having executive background in the board, and also very important is the industry knowledge. So those are elements that maybe differs than the non-profit organization. Also in the public company, I think that governance experience, previous governance experience is very important. But the key, as always, is to have people easily to integrate into the board community, in the board team. So team playing is a key word, in addition to commitment and time availability.
That's very helpful for both of you. And what about first-time board members on that side? How open? And Shanna, you did a good job of identifying it's not just public versus private. It's I'm sure there's a huge difference in public companies versus private companies versus PE-backed companies. But what are you seeing around openness to first-time board members?
So I think in terms of public companies, there is almost always a strong preference for candidates who have past corporate director experience. As it relates to privately held companies, quite often really good, relevant, transferable, not-for-profit board experience can be incredibly helpful. I think with private equity and portfolio companies, there's a much stronger interest in some governance experience, but also industry sector expertise.
Okay, that's great. And Umberto, are you seeing anything different in Europe in terms of openness to first-time board members?
No, I agree. Even if now, if you demonstrate exceptional qualification in specific in specific areas, this may be an element of an interesting introduction at the board. I just give you an example. More and more boards are looking for people that are able to understand the impact of new technology, digital, artificial intelligence, not just because they are technicians, but because they understand which is the level of impact that those technology can have in for the organization. Or in another area, for example, to have people that knows very much the dynamic of the industry sectors, evolution strategy, and so on. In that cases, especially if the company adopt the concept of the staggered board, in which there is a number of board members that are stable and they knows the company already. In that cases, a new board member a new entry can be introduced easily.
A great example, Umberto, is so the idea is, would they be open to a first-time board member who is just a generalist? Maybe, maybe not. But if they're looking for a new skill that maybe is harder to find with experienced board members, they're still going to want that broad business background, but that new area of expertise skills, whether it's, artificial intelligence or cybersecurity or who knows, sustainability or whatever it is that's important to them, that might open up an opportunity if it's a very specific skill that they need. So I think that's a great example. Let's go on to the next set of questions. And that's really focused on an overview of the board search process. So in this case, what I'd like to do, and again, we're more focused on not-for-profit boards here, but you can sort of weave in whatever you'd like to say on this subject. But, how does the board search process work? Whether they're using a search consultant or not, there's still a search process. So how does the board search process work? And Suzanne, let's start with you.
Sure. So I think, by the way, the search process is pretty similar, whether nonprofit or a corporate board. It needs to be rigorous and sensitive. There's more difference probably between the executive search and the board search. But by and large, the process steps include initially aligning and confirming what's the profile, where's the gap on the board that the board is looking to fill. And then us going to do our research and going to the market to speak with potentially good fits for the role. And then there are sometimes 3, sometimes 2 rounds of interviews with typically the nominations committee members, as well as the chair. And then often CEO is also brought into the mix, although they're not a decision maker. And we do referencing. So be sure to have your references ready. And nonprofit boards may be more willing to interview online nowadays versus flying people in for interviews to save costs. I think that's a brief summary.
Okay, great. And Shanna, what would you add to that?
When we're brought in to help with search for a board member, we do treat it very much like a search for any other executive. And we spend a lot of upfront time with the actual board and the leadership team to go through an exercise that we call a board skills matrix to evaluate the culture of the board, challenges, opportunities that they may be facing. And then we help them with that in terms of really developing key criteria, a position description, all of that. And again, interview candidates just as we would for any executive level search.